I a tātou katoa. I'm Gillian Bishop. I'm from Tasman Environmental Trust. The Trust leads work to protect and restore the native heritage in this region. That's Tasman and Nelson. Tonight we're partnering with the Climate Forum to host this event.
Thanks. So I'm David Bartle, and I'm going to introduce this session. And I'm from the Climate Forum, the Nelson Tasman Climate Forum. And so we are a community group who try to facilitate local action in a world where global warming is already adversely affecting so much of what we rely on. So we're hosting the Meet the Candidates events because we want our councillors to take certain actions, specific actions that will help our communities to adapt to the climate crisis. We think this is a crucial time in Aotearoa, New Zealand, as we move towards the 2030 milestones, by which time we've agreed to almost halve our emissions. If we are to protect our communities and our biodiversity, we need to change. And so we're eager to hear how you council candidates tonight intend taking on this unprecedented challenge once you are elected. A few words about our procedure. So we'll run until 8:30, and in this first hour, we'll have a short list of questions which the candidates have already seen, but we'll read them out to remind you. And we'd like, please, to try and keep the answers to 2 minutes so we can use all the time wisely. And if somebody loses track completely, somebody might say time's up. So please don't be offended if somebody said that, Gillian or I. And please respect the fact that you participants have all joined because you all want to hear the views in our community on climate and biodiversity. And for the candidates, if you don't want to answer a question, just say so, that's fine. And we are recording this session. It's one of the benefits having these online events. And we will subsequently put the recording on our website unless somebody really is unhappy with that. We'd like to do that. And in the last 20 minutes, we'll invite candidates to address a selection of questions from the floor, as it were. Excuse the term. So if you're not a candidate and you want to raise a question for the candidate, use the chat box, which is at the bottom of the screen. And Gillian and I, as the hosts, will pick up questions from there. And you can type your questions into the chat box at any time. And so now it's my pleasure to introduce the candidates. I'm going to just read out your names and then we'll start on the questions. So tonight we have Adele Terrell, we have Ray Griffiths. I don't think we've got Glenn here, have we? No, we've got Joe Ellis. Well, we've got Joni Tomset, Kit Mailing, Mark Greening, and Tim Tyler. So I don't think we have Rachel Stevenson here, do we? No. So thank you everybody for coming. And just to get us started, I'm going to put the very first question to you, Adele. So by way of introduction, would you tell us who you are and what your interests and credentials are in the arena of action on climate and biodiversity, please?
Okay, hi, I'm Adele. I, to be honest, don't really have many credentials in the arena of climate, apart from my nearly 48 years on the planet. I do keep my eyes open. I have a brain that works, I think. I love our environment, so I care for it. I take good pride in my surroundings and looking after it. I have common sense. That would probably be my credentials in the area of climate. Yeah, so just the experience of living in it, basically. Yeah.
Thank you. So
yeah,
I live. Go on.
Sorry, I live on Best Island, so I live right by the coast. So I've got a good perspective on what coastal living is like. Yeah.
Thank you, Del. So Ray, I'm going to ask you to speak now, if that would be all right.
Thank you very much. Must admit, I was a bit like Adele. I sort of pondered on this question for a wee bit. But for those that maybe not know me so well through the shop, I grew up in Tapawera, so I had quite a rural upbringing. My family had a farm out there, so we've always had a love and respect for the land. My father works in forestry, and growing up, we often used to visit like Lake Rotawiti and do various tramps, which, you know, in some cases traumatized me as a young kid, but, you know, built resilience. And recently I've enjoyed hunting recreationally. So I have a love for the outdoors. And so in that way, I suppose I have a respect for the land and how we need to preserve it. And then a little bit closer to home, through the junction, we often try and support businesses that have good practices and good morals and various things for the environment. An example being the local Oakland's Milk, with their wanting to move to solar power, their good farming practices, or for our factory, for instance, in Newdorf Road, where we have a water system that reuses the water so we're not wasting it. We often try and support various other businesses too. So that's really my credentials, I suppose, is the love for the environment through growing up in and around it, and then more recently, the supporting various other businesses that want to try and make a difference in a small way moving forward.
Thank you, Ray. Joe, would you like to introduce yourself, please? You need to unmute, please, Joe.
Sorry, forgot. Hi, I'm Jo, and thanks for having us on tonight. I'm like Adele. I'm not an expert on climate change. I value the environment we live in. We decided when we had children 27 years ago that we would be conscious of how we raised them. And so we've always made choices to make sure that we do look after the environment. I think that we're all kaitiaki of this land, and we have an individual responsibility to looking after it. And I think we need to leave the environment better than we found it. So what we've done to look after our environment, we made a choice when we had children that we did things like, well, just the way that we live. So we used cloth nappies all the way through. We don't use horrible sprays in our garden. We are careful about the products that we choose. We were careful about where we bought a home. I don't even use hair dye, as you can see. So we do the best that we can not to add any pollution to our environment as well.
Thank you. So Joni, hello. Welcome over to this area.
Kia ora, thank you. Yeah, so my name is Joni Thompson, and I mean, I am hugely passionate about climate change and the environment. Yeah, I care about the people, thriving communities, and environment is centered to everything in the decisions that I make. I personally have a deep connection to the natural world. I was previously an outdoor instructor and environmental educator at Whenua Iti Outdoors. And I've also volunteered in biodiversity world with Birdsong Trust, Maraho Halo, Keep Motueka Beautiful. I've also worked with within Nelson Tasman Climate Forum in the waste group alongside Karen, and now I'm currently a resource and environmental planning student. So yeah, the climate is a huge thing for me. Kia ora. So I will add, actually, on a personal note as well, I try and stick to whatever is best for the environment. So I eat mostly vegan, I eat hunted food, I reuse as much as I can, and I don't travel much by car. Yeah.
Thank you. Kit, please introduce yourself. We all know you, of course, but let's hear you again.
Good evening, everybody. Thank you for having me. So Kit Mailing, I'm a current councillor from Richmond, and I've done a couple of terms. I suppose my commitment comes from when I arrived in this area in 1963, so it's a fair while ago. We were pumping raw sewage into the estuary from 2 spots, in fact from 3, from Richmond, from the freezing works, and from around Turnanui Songa Street. So the environment's changed a lot since then, and I think as a society we're doing a lot better, but we've got a ways to go. So 3 years ago when I stood for council, I said if I was successful, I wouldn't attend meetings by vehicle. So I bought myself an e-bike the day after the election. And I use an e-bike to go to meetings. And I live closer now, so I actually walk sometimes, but I use an e-bike to actually attend meetings in Nelson City as well. In this previous term, I chaired the waste minimisation strategy to look at initiatives for the 2 councils to reduce waste. And one of the best things we actually do is at the sewerage business unit, where we use biosolids on Rabbit Island, which actually sequesters more carbon because we grow the trees 25% quicker, and we don't send dried biosolids to landfill, which would emit gases. So there's a number of things we're doing. I love the outdoors because I'm a trout fisherman and I spend a lot of time walking our rivers. So water quality in particular is very important to me. I think that's enough going forward. Thanks.
Thanks very much indeed. So Mark, would you introduce yourself, please?
Thank you, David. And also thank you for hosting this event and for giving the opportunity for the new candidates who are standing to be heard. I think it's really important. So I want to congratulate everyone who is standing, probably for the first time from what I can see, for council. I think it's really courageous of you to do it, and congratulations for doing it. My name's Mark Greening. You'll have to forgive me, I've just recovered from a rather bad bout of tummy ache, putting it mildly. But what I want to do first of all is, in the spirit of the karakia that was given, just give a quick mihi from myself, and then follow that with a response to the capabilities. So, ko makaha, ko makawish take iwi, ke Brighton tako kianga, I tipuwaki hao whakatu. So my name is Mark. I'm affiliated by ancestry to the Welsh clan McCavish. I come from Brighton in the UK, and I grew up here in the Nelson region, Wakatu. I attended Richmond Primary School. We came out here when I was about 4. I grew up in Richmond. I went to Waimea Intermediate, Waimea College, and probably during that time at Waimea College was the construction of the deviation. So that was a big issue for a lot of people around the impact that would have on the estuary. I'm a barrister and solicitor of the High Court, and I'm a former senior solicitor and adjudicator for the Office of the Chief Tax Counsel. And I'm also a published author and editor of a number of tax books. If you want to have a look at a few, you can find some on LexisNexis. So what are my credentials? Well, I've been here a few years now on council. I think what I've tried to do is to bring new ideas and ways of doing things from outside the Tasman region. My thinking, to put it bluntly, is probably not confined by kind of an old boys style of thinking, which I think has gone on in the past. And yes, it is hard to convince others to change. And it's why I really welcome change around the council table. I believe it's desperately needed. And I think greening Tasman is more than just buying an electric bike, it's actually doing stuff. And in terms of specifics, I'm opposed to the Waimea Dam. I think that will bring many downstream ecological problems. I had the pleasure of meeting Dr. Mike Joy in Mapua a few years ago and reading his article on why dams are a dumb idea. And he states quite clearly, I think there was, the quote goes along the lines of about 165 academic papers on dam impacts have been written, and 92% of them report declining or negative ecological measures as a result of dams.
Sorry,
And I
Mark,
fully agree with
I'm afraid time's up. So each question, we've allocated 2 minutes for a response. Thank you.
Welcome.
So thank you very much, Mark. We'll move now to Tim. Tim, would you introduce yourself, please?
Yes, good evening, everyone. I think it's testament to the fact that the environment is actually of quite some importance to local residents that we've got such a large number of the prospective councillors online tonight. I appreciate the opportunity to explain my thoughts and of course present my credentials as a environmentally friendly council candidate. I did, like several others, ponder the question quite deeply. I'd appreciate, for a little bit of brevity, thank you, Kit, for making shit happen recently. Mark, appreciate your thoughts on the dam. However, I think we, as a district, kind of need to look forward to extracting the maximum value out of it. Now we've got it built and we're starting to pay for it. Adele, it was a pleasure to meet you last week door knocking on Best Island. I appreciate you're probably the one that's closest to dipping their toes in the problems of sea level rise. And that brings me onto my credentials. So I'm a father of one by choice. We decided to have only one child, partly because of my slow learning difficulties and figuring out how to make these things happen. And I too have an electric bicycle. In fact, this household of 4 has 12 bicycles. That's a function of the fact that I quite enjoy cycling, and I used to work for a bicycle manufacturer in the UK. I'll give a little plug to Bromptons here. Bromptons are great. They're very small. People smile when I go past, mainly because I look like a clown, but that's another story. I got a permaculture diploma when I was 17, having recognised the fact that my generation is going to have some serious problems to deal with. And I cycle to work when opportunity allows. I'm aware also of the fact that our mid-60s home, when we moved into it, was uninsulated, single glazed, had a fire that was essentially open. And we've made some domestic steps here. We've put some serious coin into making sure that it's actually quite environmentally friendly. And I commend anyone who puts any money into their living quarters to make them more livable and also better for the environment.
Thank
That's
you.
pretty much
Thank you,
me.
Tim. Time's up.
Thank you very much, Tim. We're going to move to the next question now. Gillian, over to you.
Thank you. The climate crisis clearly requires urgent and significant changes in how we live. Please describe a climate relevant change that you will launch through council in the next 3 years if elected. So that might be in the area of waste, urban intensification, increasing biodiversity opportunities, energy, etc. And we'll start with Ray.
Thanks, Gillian. So I thought about this for a wee while, and I think that looking through some of the plans that the Tasman District Council have, I'd like to see us continue to stick with the climate action plan that the council has developed. But I think what we should potentially do, I see that was done in 2019. And I would like to potentially hear people's thoughts from NGOs or interested groups like yourselves here at the Climate Forum to see if the plan 3 years on is enough. You know, I think my big thing is let's involve the community in these decisions. And so we've got a plan. Is it still fit for purpose? Does it need changing? And gauging the community's reaction to this to determine whether or not, you know, we as the council are doing enough moving forward. So that would be potentially what I'd like to see done relatively soon if I'm lucky enough to be elected onto council in October.
Thank you, Ray. Joe, how would you answer this question?
Okay, I don't have a particular slogan or plan coming into this election. I've actually spent the last 17 years submitting to council by the long-term plans, the Richmond West development, and things like the Headingley Centre, asking the council to look at things like light pollution, putting grey water usage systems, rainwater storage solutions, making council plantings native or food producing. I've also submitted on not using geophosphates and sprays, and as we're looking at foraging and things like that, which I'm quite interested in, making those things available for people to use to help make our region more resilient. So after 17 years of submitting and the council refusing to do things like that, we asked them to put all the new builds in to include rainwater systems. We worked out a cost, it would be 10 million, less than 10 million to put one in every home in the Tasman region, as opposed to the cost of the dam. I also spent a lot of time submitting about the dam, which Mark will be able to let you know. So now that my children are growing, my children used to have to run around the council building as I was submitting, which was pretty tough. It made it hard to have a say. So I committed then to standing when my children were growing, to give a voice to those people that weren't able to submit. I mean, we had no choice, but yeah, so I want to bring those things in that I've been trying to get the council to listen to for the last 17 years. We need to make sure that every time we look at every single decision coming through council, one, is it the best use of our money? And two, what is the actual true impact on our environment going to be? So I'll just be carrying on with what I've been trying to get done for the last 17 years.
Thank you, Jo. Joni, what climate relevant change would you launch?
So if I'm thinking blue skies and not having to influence the other 13, for me, it would be hugely about intensification, intensifying further than that's already planned under the future development strategy, minimising urban sprawl, and only developing in areas that are going to be resilient for the next 100 years. But for me, especially, like, you already have your climate action book. It's honestly, for me, it's just about connecting the things that you've already identified under the governance category and doing whatever we can within council to be able to achieve those things. Yeah, that's huge for me.
Thank you. Kit, what climate relevant change would you launch?
Well, we've just been successful in getting some funding from central government in terms of a cycling and walking strategy. And one of the key things you need to remember when you try and get on council or when you're there is you can't progress anything unless you get 7 votes. You need the other people around the table. I remember the first time I got on council, I tried to do something about something and I certainly didn't have the vote, so it didn't happen. So walking and cycling, getting people out of their cars, particularly people getting kids to school. So there's a strategy that's likely to be presented in the next term in relation to cycleways along Hill Street, Queen Street, Champion Road and Wensley Road. And that's going to make a significant difference because parents don't want their kids to cycle to school at the moment because they don't think it's safe. So if we can get people on bikes, out of their cars, that will make a huge difference. And I think if we can achieve that in the next term, that will be a significant thing for our council and our community going forward. Thanks.
Thank you, Kim. And Mark, what climate relevant change would you propose?
So as you're probably aware, I oppose the FDS, which I believe will allow more urban sprawl, which will only increase transport emissions. So I would like to see that FDS reworked to improve incentives for good quality intensification. And I don't agree with intensification in greenfields. I don't believe that's good intensification in my book. Certainly doesn't reduce car emissions, and it certainly doesn't improve walkability. So I also would like to acknowledge that I do support initiatives that make the town more walkable. And if you are interested in how walkable Richmond is, I certainly welcome you to check out my Facebook page, which is Greening Tasman, which has a link to quite a good app on the walkability of various towns, including Richmond. And I continue to lobby for more remote meetings, which I think also reduces the need for unnecessary travel. And I've also tried to advocate for staff to work more remotely, which I believe should also reduce the need for new council buildings. And I continue to lobby for more woodland areas in our parks. I believe creating more wooded areas in our parks is good for the environment and is good for kids to play amongst as well.
Thank you, Mark. And Tim, Tyler.
Okay, folks. Well, possibly unlike anyone else, I've actually got some experience of sorting down at the recycling centre as a day job between contracts as a software trainer. So I'm well aware of...
Can we interrupt you, Tim, and just see if you'd like to put your video on so we can see you? You don't have to.
The laptop I'm using isn't that flash, so I can click start video.
Sorry to interrupt you. Just carry on.
Doesn't work so well sometimes.
Okay, we can imagine what you're looking like. It's all right.
That's right. Think a better looking Christopher Luxon.
Okay.
You know, with the chrome dome.
Carry on, please.
Reflection this way, anyway.
Carry on.
Yeah, so I'd like to see a more extensive recycling scheme, possibly folded in with free rubbish pickups for recycling in a wider range of recyclables. So, you know, picking up 3 plastic types is lovely, and I get the fact that there are financial imperatives for that, and also practical ones. So I'd like to see that TDC in the next 3 years develop a capability to process within the district our own rubbish to a greater extent, and potentially roll that out to other areas and other districts as well, such as the West Coast and especially Buller, who truck their rubbish and recycling up to Richmond. Interestingly, counterintuitively possibly, I'd like to see an improvement to the Gladstone Road Queen Street intersection to improve the flow of traffic and therefore the air quality. That's not to make it easier for folks living in lifestyle blocks or glorified sections in the Appleby Hills a quicker journey into town, because I think they should be hopefully car sharing. And I think I'd like to agree with Mark in terms of the future development strategy, but I'm also a realist, and I think that that's possibly the best we can get, given that it's a multiple council agreement or slash strategy. It's better to have an imperfect plan than a perfect one. So at least it's a step in the right direction.
Thank you, Tim. I see Olivia has her hand up. Will we take questions now?
I think we should leave it till later, if that would be all right.
Okay, well, thank you, Olivia. Please save your question and we'll come back to you.
That'd be right. So just
yeah.
Shall I raise the next question then, Gillian?
No, we're not quite finished.
Sorry.
We've got Adele to answer this question.
Sorry.
Yeah. Adele, please describe a climate relevant change that you would launch.
Yes, that's a good question. I pondered it a lot because I'm not sure. I think until you get in the council, you're not exactly sure just what things you can influence or what you can do. But what I would like to see is our communities being built to be more resilient so that we're not so reliant on importing stuff and using energy and stuff that comes from other places. So I think we should be supporting using local resources, reducing those food miles and transport miles for all sorts of things. I'd definitely support and would really like to initiate some rainwater storage initiatives for people in private homes. I'd like to see that subsidised for everybody so that we can all run our own gardens and things like that. I'd like to see more initiatives around food sharing, community gardens, even land sharing as far as intensification goes. I think there are a lot of people moving to our community who come here because of lifestyle and they don't want to live in a tight little urban environment. And so I'd like to see spaces opened up for like off-grid living and community or land sharing sort of situations, tiny homes, because you get more bang for your buck out of your housing and sharing resources that way. I'd also like to see some things instituted like subsidies for when people are building homes to be using local resources in them, like local wool for insulation, things like that. Hemp producing is happening locally or at least domestically. So that would be another thing that I would support using. Just using local stuff to do the stuff that we need to do locally rather than importing and using all that carbon miles, whatever you call them. That's probably all I've got to say on that.
Thank you, Adele.
Thank you.
Thank you. Yep, that's the end of this section.
So
Okay.
I lead on the next one.
Yep.
So we're going to ask our candidates about transport. Some of you commented already on this, so you might want to add to what you've said. So we're raising a transport question because 90% of our local carbon dioxide emissions are actually from our transport. And so the question is, what would you specifically do to help reduce transport emissions, building on what the Tasman Council has already started? So Joe, we'd like to start with you, if that'd be all right. You need to unmute, please.
Sorry, this is one of our hardest ones because it sounds like such a big problem, but I think we need to really identify where the problem is. So it is a massive part of our CO2 emissions in our region, but New Zealand actually only produces what, 0.3% of the world's emissions. And we also have the, so it's actually quite a small amount compared to what other countries are producing. So, and we also have to look at how our region has already been designed, where we've got lots of pockets of intensification, long distances apart, but we've also developed community facilities, mainly based at the larger ones. So if someone wants to use them, they've had to travel. And we've seen that with sports being put into Saxton Field. So we're seeing people having to travel large distance to participate in community facilities. So that's something we need to look at. So if we want to cut down on travelling, we've got to make sure that we've got as many community facilities in the smaller pockets as there are. I mean, we're seeing people travelling from Motueka to Nelson on a regular basis as a daily commute. And and heading from Nelson to Motueka on a daily commute, we really have to look at our attitudes to how and when we travel. But I think it's, unfortunately in our area, it's going to remain an issue for a long time, just because of how we're situated and how we live. So we've also got to have a program where we can reduce the emissions while we're in the car. So we have to have good movement of traffic. Somebody brought up the issue through Queen Street, which is near where I live, and it has been terrible. It used to take me, for a while there, it was taking half an hour to 3/4 of an hour just to get from McShane Road to Sexton Field.
Thank you. Joe, I'll have to ask you to just bring that point to conclusion because our time is racing by.
If we're going to travel, which we have to do, we've got to make sure that the flow of traffic is better. No way should we be putting traffic lights into the new Appleby subdivision. And if we're going to have things like cycleways down Queen Street, we've got to make sure we can still keep that traffic moving that's already there.
Thanks, Joe. So, Joni, what would you do as an initiative once you're on the council on transport?
I'm just going to comment more on what TDC has already started.
Yep.
Aroha everyone, my jaw is very sore from my teeth.
Right. Yep.
So, yeah, I fully support the implementation of the walking and cycling strategy. I'm currently on the Motueka Community Board, and throughout those 3 years, we've been seeking as many funds that have been available through NZTA to progress whatever is already planned to happen faster. So I would continue to do that alongside staff. Just on a personal story as well, I developed epilepsy 2 years ago, so I had to commute purely by bike for a whole 1.5 years, I think. So just something that I think is really important in the implementation of active transport is ensuring that it's actually fit for purpose. So ensuring the services of the roads are suitable for commuter bikes, and that includes gravel bikes, e-bikes. It will mean scooters as well. I'm really sorry, my jaw is really sore. That they're maintained, there's sufficient parking. Other ideas as well is just ensuring that there's enough charging ports in our recreational areas so that people can actually charge their e-bikes. Something I've advocated for, especially with the public transport plans, is with the digital plan that's coming up, to ensure that there's a really close connection with the buses and public transport, and then the technology, so that people are aware when buses are coming through, and there's a bit more synchronicity with that. I would also, on a personal level, advocate to central government for incentives for e-bikes, similar to the Clean Car discount that's available now.
Thank you.
Good.
Thank you very much. So, Kit, would you talk on that question, please? Transport. And
just quickly then, public transport. So from July next year, there will be an extension to public transport taking buses to Mapua, Motueka, Brightwater and Wakefield. And from July next year, that bus fleet will be electrified. So this is a significant change that is coming. It's only just been agreed to, and it's a huge step forward for us. The other thing is we will have an express bus as well. So that means that you won't have all the stops. But until we can get some bus lanes, it's very, very difficult to get people to change. Because if you're sitting in the same traffic jam in a bus, it takes you a long time to get there. But to stop using diesel and to move to electrification is a huge step forward for us. I think Christchurch is a city that's furthest ahead in this area, but we're following close behind. So it was significant, and it's only just been approved. So a great step forward for our district, both Nelson and Tasman.
Brilliant news. Thank you. And thank you very much. That's great news. So, Mark, what would you do?
Well, over the time that I've been here, I've been pushing for public transport priority lanes between Nelson and Richmond. I've seen it done in other cities, and it's worked successfully, and it's enabled a shift from cars to buses because the public transport system is faster in getting to work. You're not congested, you've got a separate lane to get through. It's probably why the London Underground is so popular as well. So I've been advocating for that. We're still pushing along with that. I also lobbied for a Dolmus type transport system in Richmond, and you're probably wondering what Dolmus is. If you've been to Turkey, they have lots of little buses that scoot around town and more into the suburban areas. And those buses you can just wave down. And I thought that was a fantastic idea and something that Richmond should adopt. The advantages of that kind of system is it's low cost. And one of the important things, I think, for a successful bus transport system or public transport system is essentially two things. It's speed and it's cost. So keeping costs low, keeping infrastructure costs low, like you won't need bus stops because they will just stop whenever you wave them down. And it also avoids, with smaller buses, not requiring roads to be widened for larger buses. So again, it keeps the costs down and therefore the costs for the user down as well. And probably in the past, again, I'm just acknowledging what I've been up to. I've also was very supportive of facilitating EV infrastructure through our planning process, something that our former Mayor Kempthorne opposed declaring support for when it was initially put up to council, but he was persuaded later on to support it.
Thank you.
So, yeah, okay, thank you.
Good, brilliant. So Tim, tell us what you would do once you're on council to reduce transport emissions, please.
Okay, well, the TDC plan that's been adopted earlier this year is a great step forward. In fact, it's quite visionary compared to those of other areas. Quite simply, I'd just try and help to deliver that plan, and of course heartily encourage our neighbours over in Nelson to adopt something very similar.
Thanks. Okay, we'll move to the next question, which does also have a slight transport angle. And Gillian, you're going to deal with that one, please. Hang on, we've got some other candidates on our side. I'm getting into a mix-up here, sorry. Adele, I need to ask you, please, about transport.
Transport. Yes, I don't have much to say about that. I'm fully pro cycling, but I don't cycle much because out here we've got a terrible road and no lights, and I go to work early in the morning, so I would find that fearful. Joe said about reducing our emissions while we're actually on the road. Yeah, I think that is the main thing that we need to focus on, is getting some better hours on end when, you know, when any little accident or anything happens between Richmond and, or between Richmond and Nelson, the entire region is gridlocked, and you've got hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of cars sitting there puffing smoke because they're not moving, they're not getting where they need to go in a timely fashion. So I think that needs addressing.
Thanks.
That would be my point on that.
Ray, sorry to leave you to the last. Would you tell us what you would do on the council on transport, please?
Thank you. Like some of the other candidates have said, I too like the cycling and walking strategy that the council have put in place. I know that when I moved into Richmond 2.5 years ago, I made a choice that where I could, I'd walk to try and reduce, from my point, congestion on the roads. Helps that I'm 10 minutes into Richmond CBD, so that really helps too. It was something that when I lived overseas in the UK, it was something that I sort of got used to, avoided driving where I couldn't utilise public services. So yeah, I'd like to also see continued cooperation with the Nelson City Council to make sure that bus links between Richmond and Nelson are efficient, various times to suit all the different people commuting, and then see if we can, through some central government funding, to try and make public transport free. I know that through the recent half price fares, it was in the Waimea Weekly last night, that there was an uptake in people using public transport, which I think is a good step in the right direction, because I'm a believer that smart towns and cities have the infrastructure in place that people can drive their own cars, but public services also that they don't have to. So by having more access to people using public services like public transport, the buses and so whatnot, and cycle and walking strategy, that would be something that I would be working to commit to if I'm on council.
Thank you. Gillian.
Thank you. Our next question relates to urban intensification. And urban intensification has become essential to cut vehicle kilometres per person, which are among the highest in the world. I'm assuming that is New Zealand, not Tasman area. In our future development strategy, how should Tasman District Council's planning, consenting and investment efforts accelerate urban intensification over the next 3 years? And I'm going to start with Joni, please.
Kia ora. So this one's quite a hard one to answer, just because of the huge amount of reforms that are going to be happening over the next 3 years. So I guess in a blue skies thinking, like I've said, I would just change the balance of intensification in the future development strategy in general, and enable more intensification. I don't want to commit to saying anything over the next 3 years, just because of the RMA reform and what that's actually going to signal for council, and what that's going to mean in terms of planning. Yes, I would just say on that, and I think that we need to focus much more on the intergenerational lens and thinking within that 100-year time frame, rather than a shorter time frame, knowing the predictions that we have, and adapting accordingly to that. Yeah.
Thank you. Kit.
All right, well, just we've already got RITA, which is Richmond Intensification Area, but it doesn't work that well, because when somebody wants to intensify and you go for a resource consent, the neighbours object. But interestingly, we've got 6 townhouses in Arborlee that the neighbours were concerned about, but now that they're actually in place, the next door neighbours are quite happy, and it isn't imposing on them. But one of the concerns that I have with intensification is it is quite expensive, because you're buying existing houses and pulling them down and then building something new more intensely. And a good example is the corner of Queen Street and Oxford Street, opposite the BP garage. There are 7 townhouses going in there where there were 3 houses. So the 2-storied is quite intense, but they're priced at over $1 million. So you get intensification, but you have affordability issues. So a better outcome, I think, is where we're working with Habitat for Humanity, and in Queen Street, they're doing an intensification project in Upper Queen Street, which is going to have 5 houses, and people will be able to use sweat equity and other things to get into those houses. So intensification is a good thing, but some of the models make it very, very expensive, and affordable housing is just as much a bigger issue in our district as intensification as well.
Thank you, Kit. Mark.
Yeah, so in terms of the FDS, I don't think it will accelerate urban intensification, and well, at least good intensification. That's why I opposed it. I think it will just allow more urban sprawl, which again will only increase transport emissions. Opening up more greenfields, which is predominantly what it is doing in the Tasman region on productive land, is not providing the right incentives to intensify. You're just allowing more urban sprawl. It also doesn't support making Richmond more walkable, because housing is then further away from amenities, which just drives greater car use, forgive the pun, and doesn't support another objective of the council, which is walkability. So I try and look at things a little bit more holistically, and I have found over the course of my time on council that the council doesn't necessarily look at all of these things holistically and try and have an overall strategy as to what it's doing. It tends to bolt on bits and muddle along. So it would be good to have a much clearer overarching strategy that's more holistic. In terms of intensification, which Councillor Mailing was talking about, I think that's still not really the good intensification that can occur. Good intensification, while the capital costs may be high up front, the cost to the individual in buying into those intensive complexes is actually lower and shouldn't be $1 million. The ones that I've seen in Europe, in Wellington and Auckland and Christchurch, they're really good intensive developments that are big enough to encapsulate a number of a mix of housing, living environments, 1 bedrooms, 2 bedrooms, 3 bedrooms, and provide a lot of green space around those developments. And what I'm seeing at the moment is what I would not call good intensive development. What it is it's actually loading up the capital with only 2-story houses. That means that it's even more expensive to redevelop that site. So I think we just need to be more proactively facilitating with developers and others the ability to put in place good quality intensification, and I don't think we've seen it yet.
Thank you, Mark. Tim, what are your thoughts on urban intensification?
Yeah, look, I'm going to keep it short. As a councillor in the next council, I would be proposing a strong pricing incentive for greenfield versus brownfield developments. I appreciate people should have the ability to build housing on their own land within the zoning rules, but I would also be strongly inclined to make it more attractive to developers to develop brownfield sites and build more intensively. I think let the market decide, and absolutely work with organisations such as Habitat for Humanity, Nelson Tasman Housing Trust, and the like, Salvation Army, to cater for the social end of the spectrum in terms of housing. And that'll do me for that one.
Thank you. Adele, what about you in terms of efforts to accelerate urban intensification?
This is a tricky one for me because I grew up rurally and I love the living in the country and I love the big wide open spaces. And to be honest, the thought of urban intensification, it kind of grosses me out. But I know that we need to house people, and we need to we do need to reduce that traveling side of things. But yeah, for me, I need a lot more information. I need a lot more evidence, a lot more consultation with the community over this. I see that Christchurch City Council has just completely rejected the proposal for the urban intensification there because there's so much public opposition to it. And so I think for me, I would want to have a lot more consultation with the public about how they actually want things to look in our community. Yeah, because there are ramifications for it, for lifestyle and for, our neighbourhoods. There's always ongoing effects to every little decision that you make, and the way intensifying a community could make it less community spirited. It could make it, I don't know, it could promote an increase in crime or all sorts of things. I think we just need to look into it a bit further. There's more at stake than the climate there. There's a whole social side of things that are, you know, it's just as important.
Thank you. And Ray.
As a humble cheese seller, I struggled a little bit with this one. I had a really good meeting with one of the other people here on the chat, Timo, about brownfield and greenfield, which sort of similarly to Adele, I'd like to see more information on, just to get myself up to speed a bit better with that. But I do understand that brownfield is, for intensification purposes, is the way to go forward. It keeps people closer together so that they can utilise the walking and cycling strategy and various other plans and things that we have in place. But equally, I understand that there is to be a mix of greenfield development too. My view on that is that if we are to do greenfield development, that it needs to be on the least productive agricultural land. I just see that, you know, we're surrounded in Hope in the Waimea Plains with, you know, this amazing agricultural land, and we are a fruit bowl in the country for the various goods that we produce. And I'd hate to see a large chunk of that taken up to put houses. So we have to, as the argument's been put, do urbanisation or intensification. It just becomes, how do we do that? And I'm certainly not equipped with all of that information, but I'm certainly willing to sit down and learn and understand, you know, where we need to go with that. So in that mindset, I'm very open to what the experts have in mind. So that would be how I would try and move forward. I'd offer you my ear and my open mind so that we can come up with the best way forward that everybody can win. You know, it's a win-win for everybody.
Thank you. And Joe, what are your thoughts on urban intensification?
Well, it's a pretty tricky thing, because I'm in favour of people living close to the resources that they're using and to the community that they're using. But I'm also mindful of making sure that we have an environment that's pleasant to live in. I have lived in areas around the country, and some of those places, you know, I describe them as battery farming for people, as opposed, you know, so it's going to be tricky to try and find the balance between intensifying areas and keeping them as communities. We chose to come to Richmond 20 odd years ago for the community feel, but I am lost for solutions and exactly how that might look. The looking at the new development in Richmond, I think we've done some great work with the walking and accessibility to town, but I think we failed with the location and sea level rise. And we've also could have utilised that land, if they've decided they're going to use it, better. We're still stuck with individual dwellings, and while there's plenty of green space, there's not actually a hang of a lot that's usable for the people that live there. And I would like to see, if we are expanding into some of these areas, that we're doing it to allow for perhaps community gardens, or maybe even like the allotment systems, rather than just house after house after house. And, you know, also bearing in mind what we're actually going to do with our wastewater that's coming from these places as well, and ensuring that we do have systems in that are efficient with our water uses. The other thing too with intensification in Richmond that we have to bear in mind, going into areas that there already are, and we've seen some nice places being developed at the moment, and it's going to be interesting to see how they pan out. But I do have a concern about how some of our current systems are going to withstand further intensification. And, you know, especially things like our water delivery systems are not necessarily up to delivering or removing the water that's coming off those properties. And the same might be said for delivery of electrical, of power and things as well. So we're going to have to really bear that in mind. Kind of, yeah, it's tricky and it's going to take a lot of learning on my part, but that is my focus, is making sure if we're going to do it, and if we have to do it, we can't, unless we put the, you know, we're closed to sign up. We're going to have to bear these things in mind as we're doing it, because it will all come as a cost. And that is part of what I'm standing for, is to actually try and reduce some of the costs, and let's do it smarter than we've done. We just had an opportunity where I think we could have done a lot better than we've just done.
Thank you, Jo. Thank you. David, over to you.
Okay, thank you. We are starting to running out of time a little bit. We did have 2 more questions for the candidates, one on conservation and the other on coastal inundation. And I'm going to ask the first question, but if a candidate would like to say anything about the coastal inundation thing within the time, go ahead. The other thing is also to remind the audience that if you have a specific question you'd like us to put to all the candidates, this is the time for you to write it right now, please. And we'll have a look at what you've submitted, and we'll try and select at least one of those. I've just gone through the chat, and I'm having seeing lots of interesting comments, but I've not yet identified a question which would need to go to all the candidates. So if you have one and I've missed it, I apologize, put it in again. But if you have a question you haven't written, put that in too. So I'm going to now start, I guess, on the biological diversity question, which is question. The council does a lot in this area of conservation already, and I wanted to ask what else would you do to support more innovative use of council land for conservation? And so that would be really great to hear your views about that. And I'm going to start with Kit, please.
Right, well, council actually doesn't own that much land except some forestry, but I think the key one that's just happened in the last few years is the change on the Richmond Hills, where they're not going to be replanted in pines, they're being replanted in natives and some exotics. And we've already got trapping groups working in that area. So you'll see a significant change. Instead of a pollen cloud like we get at the moment, which is reducing, you'll see native trees in that area, which will improve our biodiversity. And the other area, I think, and Gillian knows this well, we work with a number of voluntary groups and trusts that do a magnificent amount of work in the district, right across it, not just in Richmond. We also work with private landowners on biodiversity, and I can think of ones around the estuary in particular, where some landowners have done some huge amount of work working with council, where we can supply them with some expertise, but they actually are doing a lot of the work and own the land. And that's been helping with native birds. And we had a report came in today to a workshop in relation to our coastal birds and the improvements that we're having. But we have got significant areas. I think we've got 36 of the most significant areas in relation to coastal birds. So particularly, I think the opportunity for us is Richmond Hills.
Thanks. So I'll go now to Mark, but before doing so, I'd like you to try and keep your answers maybe to a minute, if that would be all right. It is an important topic, but I'd like to ask one of the general questions that have come up. So Mark.
Thanks, David. I'm a big supporter of urban greening by my very nature and name. I'm certainly supportive of planting more trees and creating more woodland areas in our parks, which I think we can do. We have a number of parks that we can do that in. And as you've already seen, Councillor Malling's mentioned the planting of native trees on the Richmond Hills also creates those, I suppose, tying in with your other question about flooding and inundation, reduces the flooding risk for lower down, because there's trees are soaking in the water.
Thank you. That's a good contribution. Thank you. Could we move perhaps on? Is that all right?
Yeah, go for it.
So I'd like to invite Tim. What would you do? You there, Tim? Yep, go ahead, please.
Yeah, in a nutshell, look, I'm a strong supporter of the likes of Friends of Cobb. They've done wonderful things to protect some what I call rock star snails. You don't really appreciate the Poelefanta until you've seen one. Hopefully not too many French people realise we've got them. Anyway, yeah, I think it was a step forward that Kit alluded to on the Barnacote range there, with the gullies being replanted in non-exotic species. I understand the faces will still be in pine.
No.
No? Okay,
No.
That's good. I'm misinformed, and I'm pleased to hear it. So yeah, really, I think the elephant in the room, of course, in the Tasman region is DOC, who've got no less than 3 national parks and a significant state forest that we as a council should be working more closely with to leverage their funding and their abilities and skill sets into maintaining our beautiful environment.
Thank you. So Adele, I'm going to ask you to comment on a conservation initiative that the council should be taking.
Well, I'm pro lots of native plantings. I love all the stuff that we're doing around the edges of the estuary, especially on the island where I live. There's loads of planting going on along the edges, which is really great. So I'm pro that. Put plants everywhere. Put them in roundabouts, put them on grass verges, put them, yep. That's
Right.
what I'm, yep.
Well, that would mean we wouldn't be able to find Ray's business because it'd be covered in trees. But Ray, what would you do?
Thank you. It's already been slightly alluded to, but I just think that although it's more expensive, we should be investing in New Zealand natives over exotics to keep up our biodiversity. And then similar to what Mark was saying, you know, putting those natives also in our places like Washburn Gardens and various other areas. I think the more we can use native bush and native trees and native plants, the better. So that's really all I have on that one.
Thank you. Joe, please, your initiative on conservation.
Well, there's not a lot I can add to what everybody said. I mean, all in favour of biodiversity and using areas with as much native flora and fauna as possible, but also not damaging it by not adding extra poisons to the environment. And that's something I've submitted on before, but you know, I can't add too much extra that's new. So might as well be as quick as we can.
Very good. Thank you. Joni?
I'm just going to say, whatever you've wrote in this governance book, work and nature and store carbon, there's some really good ideas that we could definitely progress within council.
Is there one particular you want to refer to?
Yes, just about enhancing healthy ecosystems where possible on council land. Examples like planting like Waimea, Mushiri, planting wetlands, and then to increase our resilience. Same with the Kingsland Forest Park, planting natives, also being aware. Another thing actually on the Kingsland Park is just being aware that we are planting natives, but then there's also going to be pines still surrounding those areas. So ensuring that we are working on that. Yeah, sorry, I can't talk much more after this.
That's fine. Thank you. Now, I think we've heard the candidates on that question, haven't we? Yes. So I thought we could possibly pick up one of the questions from the chat, Gillian, if that would be all right. And we
Good idea.
Right. There's a question here about the Richmond South development and about you know, being on productive land, and is this something the council should be supporting, do you think? But I'd like to ask the candidates to comment on that. So it's something I think it's been in the planning area for a while, but what should you as a councillor do to address that issue about further agricultural land in Richmond South going into suburbs? So I'm going to start, I think, again with Tim this time. Tim, tell us what you would do about Richmond South, please.
Okay, I've already responded to Olivia's question in the chat. Personally, I would support development in the Lower Moutere Hills, which is also flagged in the future development strategy, over development in Richmond South. Ironically, having door knocked in the area south of Bait Up Road, there appears to be several people who are quite happy to live in a newly built house on what was recently agricultural land, who are deeply opposed to the idea that other people should be able to build a house on more agricultural land. So there's a bit of a NIMBY aspect to some people's intentions there. And
thanks.
Yeah, that'll do.
Thanks a lot. So Adele, how would you tackle this challenge?
I'm actually not very familiar with that, so I'll pass on that one.
Okay, thank you. Ray, would you like to comment?
Yeah, I must admit, when I heard Richmond South, I thought that was predominantly the Pattern Rise, Hart Road sort of area leading to the switchbacks. But upon further discovery, I realised that it was that beautiful apple orchard over the hills. So, I mean, my view would be I would rather see more intensification on the Richmond side of the switchbacks, so that we could use the hill almost as a buffer, and to try and keep that lovely orchard and agricultural area as it is. So that's sort of my thoughts on that.
It's a hard one, isn't it? So Joe, would you contribute, please? Go ahead.
Sorry, I just unmuted myself. Look, this has been in the pipeline for a long time, and it's been a long time since I've looked at those plans. Richmond South was being looked at as they were looking at Richmond West. There's been quite a substantial amount of intensification. I think if we're going to intensify close to Richmond, it's the more logical place to go as opposed to out on the plains close to the see where it's happened now. But honestly, I'm not in favour of too many more rural areas being cut down into developments. We lost a chance where so many of them were put into small holdings that you can't actually do anything with. Just on the other side of the switchbacks that Ray was talking about, they've done smaller blocks, and it just seems such a waste, so close to town, walkable to town, to do that kind of acreage instead of either intensifying it or keeping it in large blocks. This lifestyle, although I'm on a little 2-acre block myself that was already existing, and we deliberately chose one that wasn't subdivided off to prevent that urban sprawl. So,
Thanks, Joe. It's time's up.
Mr. Chance.
Thank you. So Joni, what would you do about the South Richmond?
Obviously, food security and protecting our productive land is a really big priority for me. And I just interpreted this: would I push it ahead of upcoming changes for the direction of the direction of central government? And I just said I would wait and see what the direction of central government would be before I made a decision, rather than pushing it ahead.
Thank you. Not anticipating it. Yeah. So Kit, could you comment on this, please?
All right. Well, there's always a tension, and there's two national policy statements, one about providing housing and the other about protecting productive land. And that is always the tension. So the Richmond South development looks going along the foothills rather than out on the Waimea Plains, where the land is even more productive. And it is, as Joe said, already subdivided into a number of lifestyle blocks. I think of that 220 hectares, only 80 is actually irrigated. So it is not used in high production as it could have been. And those lifestyle blocks happened in the 1980s, generally. So the ship sailed some years ago in relation to that. So it's a balance, and there's always a tension. And there will be a plan change going forward, and I'm probably going to be involved in it if I'm still on council. So, like I say, there will be a tension between protecting productive land and also providing housing. We have to do both, and it's not going to be easy.
Thanks, Kip.
Mark, do you want to add something?
Yeah. So there's been about 3 attempts to develop this land. First through the government rejected it. Second time was a private application. The Environment Commissioner rejected it on the basis that it was highly productive land. And then this council's attempted to, again, enable it to be developed through the FDS, which I voted against. I don't believe we should be doing this, and I opposed it. And hence why I've alluded to earlier the fact that I would look to rework the FDS. The irony is that some of the property that is pushing to get developed, the owners actually bought a share in the dam, which I find rather bizarre that they would buy a share in the dam and then look to rezone it residential. Something's fishy going on there.
Thank you very much indeed. I'm going to hand back to Gillian now. Yeah.
Do you want another open question, or shall we?
I think we should probably wrap up unless there's something really important that somebody would like to raise.
Yep.
Last chance. Put your arm up if you'd like to raise a question you feel we've neglected.
Joni.
So
Go ahead.
I just want to comment talking about adaptation. And there was one final point, which I think is really important. And it's even in your plan, but it's about encouraging strong community engagement, remaining transparent, and encouraging the community to participate. And I just think of one thing, and this is why it sticks in my mind.
I'll be out in 5 minutes.
Is the fact that the future development strategy within their survey asking what housing types people would like. I was looking at it yesterday, and in Tasman, only 4% of the people that were asked were under 29, when actually the total population was 18%. And so I've just turned 29. And for me, it's huge that if we're making decisions about urban environments, intensification, climate change, that it takes into account the generation that it's actually going to affect. And that includes in the data that's presented to council to therefore make decisions on. So that is honestly, and I know it would be for all of you, but engaging with the community and ensuring that all groups are properly represented, and that's in who you vote for, but it's also the information that is recorded, accounted for. So that's, the last point from me.
Very good point, thank you. I think we'll bring this session to a close now. And I want to thank you, the candidates, very, very much indeed for addressing these questions and coming forward to serve our community. And we wish you all the best in the campaign. And we would like to thank everybody for joining this session. And we acknowledge the some money we had from the lottery grants community projects to help advertise it. And so I'm going to ask Gillian to close with a karakia, please.
Thank you. The karakia is a karakia that is used after work done well together, and it alludes to paddling a waka together on the sea and having landed on the beach. We pause to reflect on what we've done together. Ko te ha, ko te pō, ko tangara, ko tō mana, ko te kotaiitanga o ngā mata waka, hau mai e, hui e, taihi e. Thank you very much, everybody.
Right, thank you. Bye.
Thanks.
Much.
Bye.
Good
Good night,
night.
everybody. Bye.
Bye.
Bye.